Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with one other person. This week I am joined by Michael Love. Michael is the Director of Policy at OPITO, which I'm actually quite excited about. First OPITO person on my podcast. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely, Michelle, and thank you so much for having me on today. As you said, my name's Michael. I'm the Director of Policy at OPITO. I'm sure many of your listeners will know, but OPITO is the global not-for-profit skills and standards body for safety-critical industries. My career has spanned more than 12 years now across energy, starting working at training providers around the UK, maritime, oil and gas, offshore renewables. I joined OPITO more than 7 years ago now. Time flies. And throughout my tenure, I've been really fortunate to work as part of a number of different teams, from quality assurance to energy transition. And now for the past few years, I've been very much embedded in the policy space. So looking after our kind of external affairs, government engagement, but also our research, data, labour market intelligence functions, and our advisory services offering as well, where we try and support governments, industry, and other organisations navigate a little thing called the energy transition.
So how did you get started in the energy sector?
I don't know if you'll be able to tell from my accent, but I am a proud Aberdonian. Grew up in Aberdeen, studied in Aberdeen. My dad had always worked in the energy industry, but I think, it certainly wasn't planned, I don't think. I studied English literature, Aberdeen University, and I like to joke that that's meant that I can put together a fairly decent email, but it doesn't exactly prepare you for life in the energy industry. But I found a real interest. When I left university, I kind of fell into a low-level project administration, project coordination role, developing or helping to develop e-learning solutions for Subsea 7, Technip, large clients like that, all around managing safely in the subsea sector, working at height, confined space, and other things like that. And that really excited me because it introduced me to the sheer scale of the industry that we're involved with and how much goes into making sure that things run properly. But the journey from then has been far from linear. I was affected by the downturn that hit Aberdeen in kind of 2014, 2015, and that prompted a move down to Glasgow, where I joined a training provider that was really specialising in marine training. And throughout my tenure in a number of project-based and then kind of compliance and QHSE roles, expanded their portfolio into oil and gas and offshore wind training as well. And that was really what introduced me to OPITO, was their audit process, their very vigorous rigorous audit process. And it was almost a bit of a poacher turned gamekeeper situation as I then, after a few years in Glasgow, joined the OPITO QA team. And since then, really, it's been a series of opportunities, pursuing different interests. And I've been very fortunate to do that within the same organisation that have really led me to where I am just now.
Okay, that's a really interesting career you have. But your work at OPITO, as you work in energy transition and you're verifying all the training that's coming in, where do you see the energy sector moving forward in the UK in general?
I don't think it's news to anyone that the UK is in quite an interesting place in terms of energy policy at the moment. We have the commitment from the Labour government to phase out oil and gas exploration and production, but we also have a ramp up of renewables. Our concern at OPITO is that there's a delta in the middle there, and that is what may be responsible for driving certain skilled workers overseas to pursue other opportunities. What we're trying to focus on, a skills and standards body, was making sure that the pathways for people are as clear as they possibly can. So if you've spent 10, 15 years as an electrical maintenance technician in oil and gas, how can we translate that experience, those certifications, those qualifications into real tangible opportunities in adjacent energy sectors? We are trying really hard to focus on where we see similarities. Yes, there will be gaps that emerge. Yes, there will be skills gaps that we need to address as technologies like hydrogen, carbon capture ramp up. But if you take hydrogen as an example, there are so many transferable skills from the oil and gas sector, process engineering, repurposing of infrastructure, project management, gas safety. So I think a lot of this is about providing reassurance to the workforce that yes, the skills that you've spent time developing and honing will have relevance in this future energy landscape, but also trying to rationalise with the UK government, the Scottish government, that this needs to be an inclusive energy environment. Energy security is national security. It's not, and I think OEUK did a great job of articulating this. It's not an or conversation, it's an and conversation. So all these different energy sources must come together if we want to retain our status as this kind of world leading titan of innovation and development.
Yeah, because I think the UK is known for its innovation and is the world leader in energy. Do you think that we'll be able to hold on to that title and be known for that in future?
I think, unfortunately, Michelle, we're at real risk of losing that title. I don't believe it's too late, but I think we do need to see the right kind of positive interventions from government in terms of supporting the supply chain, bolstering local industry, protecting communities that stand to lose from an unmanaged decline in things like oil and gas production, and also, attention paid to the likes of the Highlands and Islands, which have a massive amount of potential in due to the space and the weather conditions there for other sources of energy. But there's a lot to do, I think.
Do you think that we'll be able to achieve our goal that we're working towards?
When you look at the goals, the net zero goals, we've got our interim goal of 2030 and then the eventual goal of 2050. At the current trajectory, I don't think the 2030 goal is achievable. And I think blindly pushing towards it may be careless, but there is still time before 2050 for positive interventions, as I mentioned, to take place. And hopefully we'll see solutions emerge that benefit the entire energy ecosystem and don't disadvantage one place unfairly.
Yeah, that's interesting. You were saying before a lot of people who used to work in the oil and gas industry, their skills would be transferable. Is that really true? Would they need to go back and train? What type of training is available to them?
I think it's absolutely true that there's a lot of transferable skills present in the experience and heritage that the oil and gas sector brings, Michelle. I think one risk that we see is that offshoring, if I can use that term, of skills, because there are still massive amounts of oil and gas activity in South America, in the Middle East, the Far East, and people that are familiar with work in the North Sea and have been through those established courses that those frameworks are in place for are in high demand. I think that there are a number of aspects to consider when we talk about transferability into renewables from a UK perspective. Obviously, there are things that OPITO don't directly get involved with around salary expectations, demographics, etc. But there absolutely is parallel between oil and gas skills and broader energy skills. And, I'll stop differentiating them now because it does need to be considered as energy skills moving forward. I've given some examples in the hydrogen space, but, the transport and storage elements of carbon capture lend themselves very well to kind of expertise that we have in abundance in the UK. And with wind power, electrical, mechanical, there will always be a need for roles like that. Something we need to bear in mind is, I think the focus and the onus will be much more on construction when we talk about kind of renewable projects. Traditionally, operations and maintenance has played a key role in oil and gas activity. That will probably be less so with a more renewable centric ecosystem. But in terms of practical cross-skilling advice, there are programs that exist. At OPITO, for example, we are passionate about supporting the workforce, but also insistent that we do not want to have them repeating similar or broadly similar training packages, which is why qualifications we design in hydrogen and carbon capture, in solar technologies, are designed to fit around existing apprenticeship frameworks, other systems that exist already that provide the fundamentals, and then we're adding the kind of contextual awareness, familiarization on top of that.
You were saying about how there would be, more and more jobs coming through for renewable energy. When are they likely going to be seen? Because there's not a lot going about.
No, and I think I didn't mean to give the impression that there's, an abundance of jobs in the renewable energy sector at the moment. I don't think that is the case. I think we've recently seen a relatively successful CFD around seven, which should hopefully galvanize some additional work in that sector. But I think what we need to do is be realistic as a country. And this is why that delta I mentioned earlier is a pressing issue, because we are losing oil and gas workers faster than they can be hired or find work in the renewable energy sector. So I'm hoping over the next couple of years in the run up to 2030, we start to see more opportunity for them. But we need to preserve and protect what we have at the moment.
Yeah, because a lot of the really experienced offshore workers, they are tending to go abroad. How do you think that's going to affect the skills for the UK going forward?
Well, I think it's a real concern, Michelle. Absolutely. We've prided ourselves for a long time that the North Sea, certainly in terms of skilled people, process, safety, can be heralded as something of a gold standard. Unfortunately, what we're competing with are global organizations that have interest in a number of different countries and are willing to offer packages that are attractive to what is already a relatively transient workforce. So it is something that concerns us. As a OPITO, all we can really focus on is ensuring that regardless of where those people are deployed, the skills, training, experience that they've built up over their careers to date is recognized in the right way, that doesn't introduce additional risk, but at the same time doesn't require unnecessary duplication. But I think the UK government has a challenge on its hands here to try and retain as much talent as possible, because we will need it in the years to come.
I think so too. Is there a program that's working currently to retain these type of people?
I think that there certainly are initiatives underway in a number of different places, Michelle. You know, APITO is a skills body, but we're not unique in trying to better the experience for the workforce, not just in the UK, but internationally. I know that universities, I mean, Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen, for example, has short courses that are targeting a lot of these areas. I think what we need, though, is a nationally joined up approach to this. And that's where, through our engagement with the likes of Skills England and other entities like that, the machinery of government change that recently happened that moved certain aspects of skills out of Department for Education into the Department for Work and Pensions, including Skills England, has created, I think, some more opportunity, bringing that closer to the whole linking skills to jobs conversation. But what we mustn't forget is the cross-skilling and repositioning narrative as part of that. So that there certainly are interventions that are underway. What we need, though, is a more joined up national picture.
And how would you get a more joined up national picture?
I think part of this does need to come from Skills England. I know England is in the name, but ostensibly their remit is to work closely with the other devolved nations, Scottish government, Welsh government, Northern Irish government, to try and create a narrative that makes sense, to create single data sets that are inclusive of all the right information and that reflect the true narrative of what's currently happening across the skills picture in the UK. I think it's also incumbent on skills bodies like Civipito, which we're doing, to join the dots where we can, to reach out to other entities, to collaborate, to ensure that we're signposting workers, individuals, organizations to these resources in a logical and managed way that makes sense and allows them to navigate the space. Because unless you're buried in the skills space, day in, day out, it's incredibly difficult to work out where you should be directing your attention and what the future might hold. And I think I'm hopeful that aspects like the skills passport, which is now being, ably driven forward by Renewable UK and Offshore Energies UK, will continue to expand and grow in terms of the sectors that it looks at, and provide a good centralized bank of information that workers can use in earnest.
Okay, and that's interesting. What opportunities do you see for any new students, young professionals that want to enter into the energy sector coming forward after university?
I think a lot of this is to do with how the energy sector is framed and how it's perceived, Michelle. I don't think we as an industry do a good enough job at showcasing opportunity, but also talking excitedly about the industry that we represent. We are solving some of the most complex and important engineering challenges of the modern age. This need for secure, affordable, and sustainable energy. So I think there's a very almost altruistic approach that you could look at here, but also even from my experience in the energy industry, I can attest to the job opportunities, the transfer opportunities, the secondments, the opportunities to see and work in other countries. It's a dynamic and engaging place. There will always be a need for technical expertise, the likes of your engineers, technicians, myriad of other roles included in that. Project management is critically important, always has been, will continue to be so. But I hear a lot of concern around AI and the impact that that will have on young people's prospects into energy. I think there's a real place for the arts as well, that creativity, that design knowledge, the ability to interface with people properly, to position things in the right way, community spirit. These are all very human traits that I think, the younger generation would do very well to bring into the sector. And to paint the energy industry as something that's on the way out, is pretty static, is offshoring a lot of its supply base and skills, isn't helpful. Yes, there is a real problem there to get to the root of, which is what we alluded to earlier around the current policy environment and some of the decisions that are being taken. But there is a lot of excitement that we could be presenting into broader society, and that through, again, I'm going to reference OPITO's My Energy Future program. We have energy influencers, young people that are champions of the sector that can do a far better job of relating to young people than certainly I could, to highlight what their career journey to date has looked like and how they've ended up where they are, what the opportunities look like now and what they did at the beginning. So I think there is a real action for everyone involved in the energy industry to speak about it more, to try and drum up excitement and signpost it as a viable option for young people, because it absolutely is.
It is, and I wanted to touch on what you were saying before about AI. How do you think that that's going to affect some jobs in the energy sector?
I think we will see. I mean, look, people need to program the AI. So there's always going to need to be a human element as far as that's concerned. I'm by no means an AI expert, but what I do think we will see is, as we move forward, a massive demand surge for individuals that bridge that gap between robust industry knowledge and experience and literacy in terms of data systems and data aspects. So I think if you're one of those people that has both those skill sets concurrently and can kind of combine them, I think you will be in very high demand. I think we see AI, perhaps taking the place and being able to undertake some of the more repetitive kind of manual tasks that we see in certain places across the industry. And I've got no doubt that AI as a concept will continue to shape and support office work, planning, scheduling, the more desk-based aspect of work. But I don't believe that there will be a lack of requirement for actual people to perform roles moving forward. I just think what's classed as most desirable will shift a little bit.
Do you think that there will be a shift?
I think there will be. Like I said, Michelle, I don't think there'll be a seismic shift, certainly not initially, but I do think if you are capable of being highly data literate, understanding these systems, how to interrogate them properly, the ways in which they can be used effectively. And in parallel, you're bringing a strong set of other skills to the table. If they're industry specific, then even better. I do believe those people will be in highest demand as we move forward.
Okay. So going back to what you were saying before, you think that the people who are considering even this graduate leavers, there is still a lot of good opportunities for them to get jobs in the UK then?
I mean, I take our Aptus apprenticeship program, as an example, Michelle, that is always massively oversubscribed because people are interested in the opportunity it presents and the sectors that it services and the different routes through it that one can take, whether it's electrical, mechanical, instrument and control process. What we need to make sure is that, again, through dialogue with government, we are creating an environment in the UK that is attractive for the big companies to invest in and galvanize these projects. Otherwise, we risk, I think, training people to a very high standard who then, as we said, pursue overseas opportunities. And we want to retain our skilled people here. But there's definitely a kind of timing and sequencing aspect to this. I think the opportunities for real training, development, qualification structure absolutely are there for young people. The issue is then translating that into real opportunities in the workplace. And that has to come from a supportive and proper investment environment so that companies can make decisions that will affect them long term with confidence. And that's not necessarily what we've been seeing recently.
Okay, but are a lot of companies still doing apprentices? Because I've not seen many recently.
Well, I can only speak with confidence to Aptus, Michelle, because that's the program that OPITO manages with the ECITB, and yes, the interest and the support from companies is still strong. We're just about to begin the recruitment process, or the recruitment process is underway for next year, and the response from industry has been really positive.
How would a young graduate get onto one of these programs?
And again, this is by no means my area of expertise because we have a team internally that look at the modern apprenticeship route, Michelle, but we're very active about posting on social media via our website. Our sponsor companies do the same, like your Shells, your BPs, etc., etc. So the information is there in the public domain. I suppose it's just a case of tracking it down, but I would urge anyone that may be interested who's listening to this to get in touch, and I can put them in contact with colleagues who are responsible for the recruitment, retention, the attraction of apprentices, and work with them to support them throughout that entire 4-year process from college to work site.
Okay, because there is still quite a lot of university graduates coming out and they're struggling. They are struggling to get their foot in the door or their dream job or whatever you want to call it. But how early do you have to apply for these apprenticeships?
It really varies, Michelle. We get people who are perhaps late in their career but fancy believe they can utilize their skills in a different environment that apply for the apprenticeship. Usually you would see people that are, I would say, the ages of kind of 16, 17, maybe finishing school and haven't been exposed to job interviews or anything before that are typically interviewing for spots on the apprenticeship program. But it would be wrong for me to say that that's everybody. We're very keen that we give people opportunities, but also it's a massively oversubscribed scheme, as I said, which is a good problem to have. But what we want to make sure is that those people that aren't successful, there's then some kind of additional guidance for them in terms of other opportunities they could pursue so that they're not then lost to the sector forever. Because that again, is a real risk. What happens to those that don't get on the program? Do they pivot completely and pursue a different career path in a different industry? It might be that we're losing very high potential individuals through that. And that's something we're trying to address.
How would a graduate assess whether they're on a good mentorship program?
Well, I think one thing we like to do is have a presence at careers fairs, a presence in schools. I'm sure at OPITO, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We reinvest our surplus revenue once we've covered costs into STEM. So trying to sponsor science centres, input into curriculum development, sponsor school challenges. So through that, we are trying to make the pathways that we're responsible for curating as visible as possible. I think in terms of how an apprentice or an individual would rank or quantify whether they're on a good scheme or not, I think that a number of different aspects to that. The kind of support they receive from the individuals that are assigned to to help guide them, the prospects at the end. And again, that's another area where Aptus shines, because it's a 96% employee retention rate once the apprenticeship is complete. So a number of avenues. I think even the college experience can be a big one for individuals, and we're fortunate again to have very effective partners in the likes of NESCOL and Edinburgh College and others to help deliver the content in as engaging a way as possible.
Okay, excellent. So I was going to ask you maybe one last question. What advice would you give to any new graduate looking to come into the energy sector?
I suppose I'd say three things, Michelle. One is around mindset. It's really important, and this may sound cliche, so please forgive me, but it's really important to be curious. It's important to be confident, but not overconfident. And it's also important to be patient. I think some people may step foot in the energy industry and expect everything to just start happening around them, but there's often a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into making something like a project a success. So curiosity, patience, and confidence, I think, are really important. In terms of behavior, ask questions. The only stupid question, and again, this is something I've heard many times before, so forgive me for repeating it, but the only stupid question is the one that you don't ask. Build relationships with the people around you, seek feedback, build your network, start working on your own personal brand. And I think perspective is another really important aspect. And that's something I suppose I wish I'd realized earlier, is that careers are long. Progression isn't linear. Don't feel you need to be constantly setting yourself unachievable advancement goals, 6 months apart. These things take time.
And that is really excellent advice. So I'm going to end things there. It was really good to talk to you, actually.
Thank you.
That's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Michael for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts, and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.